Hello and welcome to another episode of ATTMind Radio. Today is April 21st, 2015. It's a Tuesday and I'm your host as always, James W. Jesso. Very happy to bring to you today my interview with Martin W. Ball. He is a university professor, an author, a musician, a visionary artist, and the host of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. I've known Martin for a little while now. In fact, in 2012, I believe, I was curating and hosting a psychedelics conference in Calgary, Alberta called the Psychedelic Renaissance. And we had him do a video presentation called Entheogens as Energetic Tools and showed that at the conference. And it's available on YouTube now if you want to watch it, and I'll link it in the show notes. And also, he was the person who wrote the foreword for my second book, Soundscapes and Psychedelics, which I also link in the show notes here. And I had the wonderful opportunity to meet him at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in 2013 while I was on tour for Decomposing the Shadow and was giving a presentation at the conference. So it was mine on mushrooms, him on 5-MeO DMT, which is a major topic we're going to discuss in the upcoming interview. And since then and before then and probably for some time now, he's been a very influential guy in my life in regards to my work and my writing, and some of that we'll touch on in the interview as well. But before we get into the interview, I just wanted to do a quick couple of announcements, updates. Unfortunately, the sexuality conference that I mentioned to you guys in the last podcast and published on my website is no longer happening. So I will not be going to South Africa in May to teach on sexuality as an altered experience that allows you to open up to the mystical oneness of God through sexual ecstasy. I will instead be here in KW, thankfully, having the opportunity to go participate in the Ontario Regional Contact Jam now and the Contact Improv Festival, which is coming up in a couple weeks. I'm very excited about. It also gives me space to further invest myself into what is essentially the next announcement, which is that, well, my new book, The True Light of Darkness, a storytelling sequel to my book, Decomposing the Shadow, is now funding on Indiegogo, and we're doing super well with the funding. We're at like 40-something% of the way there with only 4 days into the campaign, which is just amazing. And I'm really excited to see the amount of support that's coming out for this book and for me and the community that's building around it as we speak. So I would invite everyone who's listening to this, please take an opportunity to check out truelightofdarkness.com. That'll link directly over to the Indiegogo campaign. Take a look at what I've got going on there and follow your heart's inspiration. And if that looks like donation, amazing. If it looks like just sharing it through your network, amazing. Any and all support is deeply appreciated. I'm really excited about how everything's going. And I'm also really excited about the support that is going on around it, including some visionary art that is up there as well, some very exclusive stuff, which you find if you read the story, the pitch, and look through it. Anyways, enough about me and my, I guess, current dealings. Let's get into this interview with Martin W. Ball. Now, we start out with a short little weather report, and then we get into his most recent book, Being Infinite, which, though quite different, is similar to True Light of Darkness in a sense that it's his memoirs. It's him storytelling what it is that he went through and how it is that he got to being one of, in my opinion, the most influential names in the entheogenic culture today. So this is it's a great interview, lots of very controversial topics being discussed, and a lot of great insight coming from Martin in this. Enjoy, and without further ado, Martin Ball. Okay, I'm happy to welcome Martin W. Ball to the podcast today. Thanks for coming, Martin.
Great to be here.
So how's the weather in your world right now?
We're actually having winter in spring at the moment here in Ashland. That we had super dry winter, hardly rained, no snowpack at all. And then it got really nice and warm. And I don't know, maybe you guys use Celsius up there, but in Fahrenheit, we were in like mid 70s and everything started blooming, and it was beautiful, and it was like springtime and late winter. And now that we're actually into spring, it's like really cold and it's raining and it's snowing, and we had a big hailstorm the other day, which is great because we need it. I mean, we're just over the border from California, and probably listeners have been aware that there's all this talk about this massive drought that's going on in California. And well, we're just over the border, so we're in the same kind of bioregion. So we're experiencing a lot of that here as well. So we can definitely use the rain and the snow, but it's a cold spring right now.
Yeah.
Definitely chilly.
Yeah, we're having similar experiences here in Ontario, which is up and over to the right, depending on what Eurocentric globe map you're looking at.
Right.
But yeah, even today, this morning, it's April, and woke up to pretty much a crust of ice over everything because of freezing rain. But I'm extremely grateful to be seeing like rainfall right now, like significant rainfall, though it is cold. It seems to be a lot of cold happening all over the place right now.
Yeah,
and it's interesting too because on some level, I don't think most people take into consideration the effect that like long frosts into the spring season can have, and droughts, because we're kind of under the assumption that food's just at the grocery store and that's that, and maybe I just have to pay a little bit more. Costs are going up anyways, whatever. But actually, it's quite a significant threat to the integrity of our food shed when we have like these really long winters and chaotic weather patterns and droughts. It's a bit, I wouldn't say scary, because it doesn't make sense to be afraid of what's happening, more so than it makes sense to acknowledge it and to make more proactive choices. But it is kind of disconcerting to think about what will happen to the integrity of the food shed if the weather continues to stay erratic.
Yeah, around here, everything started blooming around mid-February, which is really early. And the danger, of course, is that if we have a freeze after that, then everything that's bloomed is going to die. And then there's no fruit production. There's no food production. And so potential catastrophe. And, with California being the main, quote, breadbasket of the United States, I mean, this is where so many different crops are grown, that to have erratic weather in California could be disastrous, not only for the country, but for elsewhere, because that food gets exported all around the world. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure the strawberries in my fridge right now are from California.
Oh, yeah. Grow those down in Southern California.
So kind of jumping on topic, Martin, you have actually been a pretty big influence for me. The book that you wrote, I guess one of your, I don't know if you would consider it sort of like a big hit for you, but Being Human, that book was part of the inspiration that led me to writing my book, in a sense that previously I thought, it's this massive undertaking to write a book, and it would take me forever to write down these ideas, and I'd never be able to get them together. And just reading how succinct and clear that book was, I'm like, well, it is possible to express these massive ideas in a simplistic fashion that allow people to understand, and to do so, in a short period of time. Mind you, it took me a really, really long time. It was a massive undertaking, and I wouldn't necessarily hold my book at the same level as your presentation of Being Human, but your book was really inspiring for me. And,
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, thanks, man. And also, you are, I guess, part of one of the founding people, or at least from the angle in which I look at the culture, of basically the quote unquote entheogenic culture. So the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, which you host, was probably the first place that I saw that word being used in the popular culture around psychedelics or psychoactive drugs or medicines, or whatever terms people choose to use. And so I see your contribution as being an influencing one. And you have a pretty interesting story that's brought you to where you are, which is outlined in the book that came out about a year ago or so, called Being Infinite. Would you be open to just sharing a little bit of your story and kind of essentially how you got to being where you are at the point that you've launched the Entheogenic Evolution, and just around the same time that you're launching Being Human?
Okay. Wow. Well, there's so many aspects to the story, and that's one of the reasons that I put it into a book. That this is a story that I've told bits and pieces of, that I've included in my previous books here and there, and then in lots of interviews that I've done, and I've also received a lot of visitors from all across the United States and all around the world, that people who kind of come and they want to, maybe they've read Being Human or something, like, well, how did you learn all this? So it's a question that I get asked a lot. And so I've been thinking for some time that I really should just write it all down, so that when someone asks me, it'd be a lot easier to just hand them the book than to launch into, a 2 or 3 hour story about how all of this came about. Because, when I wrote Being Human, one of the things that I didn't do in that book was include anything about myself or my own experiences, which is something that I often do include in the books that I write about entheogens and about psychedelics, because I think that that's important, that I only write about psychedelics that I have personal experience with, and my own experiences have been very profound and been very transformative. So that's what I tend to write about. Like, every once in a while, somebody asks me, like, well, you've never written about LSD. What do you think about LSD? And I tell them, I don't think anything about LSD. I've never tried LSD. So I have zero opinion on it. There's nothing much that I can say about it other than, at a very general level. So in writing Being Human, that this is one of these books where then people would ask me, like, well, where did you learn this? And either that would come out of curiosity, or sometimes just out of absolute anger and vitriol, that, it's not a neutral book, that I'm not a neutral figure, that people like the other day, I'll tell you, I got an email from this woman who said that she had just finished reading Being Infinite, the memoir that you've mentioned here. And she said that when she first started it, she was just overcome with absolute revulsion. Just, this very visceral reaction of just like, oh my God, this guy is just terrible.
Oh, you're not afraid to tear down some very popular beliefs in that book, Martin.
No, I'm not. And honestly, I'm not trying to get people's goats, so to speak. I'm just trying to be clear, and I'm just trying to be honest. Yeah. And the way that I do that is just very forthright. I don't beat around the bush. I don't coddle people and their beliefs, and I don't believe in tolerance as a value simply for tolerance. If someone's talking nonsense, I'm going to tell them, I think you're talking nonsense, and I'm going to explain to you why. So it's not just an opinion, that there's a reason behind why I'm going to make a claim like that. And, Being Infinite kind of starts out with, hello, I'm God, you're God, we're all God. And that's something that can really set people off. So anyway, this woman, she writes this email. She said, when I first picked up your book, I was just revulsion, that she was just overcome, like almost with nausea, like reading these words. And she said, but by the time she got to the end of the book, she said it was just complete acceptance, and that she had relaxed and that she found the clarity within it to just be stunning. And so she's like, I'm a fan, but just wanted to let you know, when I first started reading this, I really hated you.
Sounds like an entheogenic experience in and of itself.
Well, that's I wrote her back, and I said that, sometimes kind of jokingly, but also not really jokingly, that I do tell people that dealing with me at this level of dealing with questions of truth and reality, that dealing with me is kind of like taking a very strong dose of medicine, that I tend to produce reactions in people pretty much right away, and raise a lot of discomfort for people. But if they can see their way through it, they can release some of their preconceptions and some of their illusions and some of their blocks, and that they'll probably find that actually it's quite liberating, quite clearing. And, that's at that level. At the basic interpersonal level, I think a lot of people who know me would describe me as a very easygoing, nice guy, very friendly. So sometimes when I tell people that, a lot of people out there in the entheogenic community like really despise me, sometimes that really shocks people. Like, wow, but you seem like such a nice guy. It's like, well, yeah, I am a really nice guy, but I also don't traffic in bullshit, and I'm very clear about that. And that people are sensitive about these issues, and especially when people's identities are wrapped up around certain belief systems or practices that people don't like to have their identity challenged. That, the ego is very resilient, but it's also a very fragile thing. Mm-hmm. And one of the jobs of the ego is to protect itself at all costs. And what I do is I challenge people's ego, their sense of their selves, their sense of their identity. And so that makes people uncomfortable.
I like to think that that the experiences that we have define the people that we are, like in the moment, and whether we're more or less conscious of it. Basically, we're constantly learning from experience, and that learning influences our behavior. And so for me, some of the most powerful learning experiences I've ever had are from entheogens. And as I look around and meet various people who you meet them and you talk, and then you realize, oh, this person has, a certain resonance to this entheogen or that one. And each of those people their personalities and their behaviors seem to align with the characteristics of their medicine or their primary ally. And so in my very limited experience with 5-MeO DMT in the form of Yopo, I can definitely see how your personality, when it comes to this topic, when it comes to questions about truth, as you say, that like that experience, it's kind of like no bullshit. And if you can manage to go through the triggers and get the sick that you need to get out, and then get over yourself, there's a lot to be learned there, and then things are extremely easygoing and pleasant.
Yeah, and with 5-MeO DMT, I'm definitely very much influenced by my experiences with 5-MeO DMT. I actually have a friend here in town who likes to call me a 5-MeO DMT fundamentalist. And I wouldn't describe myself that way. My preference is for 5-MeO DMT because it's the strongest and it's the clearest medicine that I've ever experienced. And just from, my conversations with other people and my work with other people, that would tend to be the universal agreement around 5-MeO DMT, that it's just simply incomparable to anything else. Mm-hmm. And so I have a very strong preference for it. But I wouldn't describe myself as a fundamentalist. That for me, a fundamentalist is someone who says this and only this. That I've never met yet. I have not met a medicine that I have not thoroughly loved and enjoyed and found tremendous value in. And my experience with entheogens and psychedelics would span, let's see, I'll just go through the list for you really quickly because I love them all. They're all great. I started out with psilocybin mushrooms. Well, actually, I'll back up and I'll actually include cannabis is where I really began my explorations. Yeah. And I would describe it as a form of psychedelic or entheogen. It's very different in its actions from the, quote, classical psychedelics, but it has a lot of things in common with it. So I'd want to put that into that category. So cannabis, then got interested in psilocybin mushrooms, and from psilocybin mushrooms, later got interested in Salvia divinorum, which I have a very particular fondness for. I think it's very, very special medicine. It's kind of a cosmic mind fuck. It's great.
And you've written books about both of these, or your experiences or your models for both of these substances.
Yeah, that's kind of where I started with writing about entheogens specifically. That I actually started writing fiction, but then from that started writing nonfiction books about entheogens, and that would be Mushroom Wisdom was the first book in that genre, and then Sage Spirit, which is about Salvia divinorum, and it's really mostly just journal entries, as well as some reflections about my salvia experiences in that book. And then from Salvia divinorum, I actually was gifted with some Yopo seeds, which you've just mentioned. So I did some work with Yopo, but at the time, in working with Yopo, which contains 5-MeO DMT, that compared to my salvia experiences, that the Yopo was just nothing really special to write home about, that salvia was so much more powerful and so much more visceral that I was kind of, I don't know what the big deal is here. But anyway, then fast forward a little bit. Then I finally got the chance to experience pure 5-MeO DMT, not in the form of Yopo seeds, but then pure freebase 5-MeO DMT in a very effective vaporizer. And even before I had taken in the full hit, I knew instantly that this was it. That's just the only way to describe it was, oh my God, this is it. And it was so far beyond anything I'd ever experienced before that it was radical. And then after 5-MeO-DMT, a few experiences there, I got to experience pure extract of NN-DMT, which honestly, since having worked both with salvia, so salvia and NN-DMT, they're kind of on par in terms of their strength. Now, they're very different in terms of their visual presentation and sort of the energetic signature of the experience, but they're kind of on the same level. After having worked with 5-MeO-DMT, NN-DMT just seemed like a cakewalk. It was like, and this is what everyone thinks is the most powerful entheogen in the world. That This is clearly not the case. That's an error. That's not correct, because 5-MeO-DMT is just many orders of magnitude beyond what NN-DMT is.
Yeah, there's actually, I read Ralph Messler's book, The Toad and the Jaguar, inspired actually by your interview with him. I didn't know about the book until then. And he mentions how back before other people, were in the know about 5-MeO-DMT, they had these code words for it. And when they would use it, they'd mix the two, the NN-DMT and the 5-MeO-DMT. And then after a little while, the insight was, why are we wasting our time with NN-DMT?
Yeah, there's no point. I mean, mixing 5-MeO-DMT with NN-DMT, the 5-MeO just completely overpowers the NN-DMT, and it's a waste of DMT to be putting it with 5-MeO, because you're not really going to experience it. And it doesn't add anything to the experience in any way, because 5-MeO-DMT just says, nope, I'm much stronger than you. Sorry. Boom. And just completely replaces the NN experience. So I was really fond of the NN experience. I mean, it's
beautiful.
So it's certainly the most visually active, and it's just overwhelming, and it's incredibly beautiful and incredibly complex. I mean, so like when I'm dealing with my own fractal art, I would say that the NN-DMT is much more influential in terms of the fractal art that I make than 5-MeO-DMT, which often is not very visual at all, though it can have a very strong visual component. But anyway, the NN-DMT was beautiful, but that was one of the things that really informed me that there is a deeply misguided notion out there in the entheogenic community where everyone is all hot about NN-DMT, and it's just treated as this is the most important molecule, and it pales in comparison to 5-MeO-DMT. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there's not a lot of exposure to people on 5-MeO-DMT. So it's relatively unknown, though that's something that's definitely changing in the current environment. And a lot more people are getting experienced with it and finding interest in it, and usually coming to the view that, oh my God, this is clearly it. And it's also just due to kind of the history of discourse within entheogenic and psychedelic communities, where we have people like Terence McKenna, who largely dismissed 5-MeO-DMT, and he was all super hot about NN-DMT. And then people like Rick Strassman writing his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and really not paying any attention at all to 5-MeO-DMT. So it became very popular within entheogenic communities and psychedelic communities that NN-DMT is like the heart of the mystery. And in my opinion, it just isn't. It's not, because it's not as powerful. It's not as profound as 5-MeO-DMT.
And I find what's interesting is that I acknowledge Terence McKenna as being a very powerful turning point for the psychedelic culture, and for me was even a big turning point in my own life, and value his contributions at that time, and also recognize that was a really long time ago, and he was one of the only people talking about it. And his ideas were great, but they were also like a place to start, not a place to hold on to religiously as some people do. And it often, especially too, since Joe Rogan has kind of jumped on the bandwagon of reciting a lot of McKenna's work when he got into the DMT thing, that it because people are easily inspired by confident speakers, and especially confident speakers that seem to language things that, are beyond most people's language and capacities, empowering them to go, oh, I can talk about this thing now, that it manipulates the angle in which they observe these experiences. So I think that though positive in a sense that things are being contributed, that the Terence McKenna's work on DMT and Rick Strassman's work with DMT, the interpretations of what that all meant in regards to maybe the ontological validity of what is perceived in the experience can and is a limitation for the development of the culture moving forward.
I think it is. And just to pick up on one of the terms that you used here, is that people do treat Terence McKenna religiously. And in fact, it's been quite specific when, I've made my own commentaries of Terence McKenna. And sometimes people come back and say, how dare you insult our prophet?
Yeah.
And, and that says it right there. I mean, not that I may want to make too broad of a comparison, but I mean, that's the mentality of Islamic jihadists with, you insulted our prophet Muhammad, so now we're going to, unleash some form of violence on you. That when we treat Terence McKenna as some kind of religious figure or think that everything that he says is holy and sacrosanct, that we're really cutting ourselves off from our own deeper explorations. And see, one of the things that became clear to me personally in working both with NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT is that when I had the full mystical non-dual experience through 5-MeO-DMT, it puts everything else into perspective. And one of the things that it put into perspective almost immediately for me was, and this was hard because I do want to say that I definitely was a fan of Terence McKenna and I was very interested in all the things that he had to say. But what became clear to me in that moment was, oh my God, he doesn't get it. He hasn't had the non-dual experience. He doesn't know what this is. And I kind of went through his writings and went through his lectures, and I was able to find essentially no evidence that he'd actually gone fully into a non-dual experience of complete dissolution of the ego, because he's always writing and speaking from a dualistic perspective of, I was there, I saw this, I was interacting with these machine elves. And so that's the language of duality. And you can only really understand duality if you go into non-duality, because that puts it into the proper perspective of what's actually going on within the dualistic experience. And it just became immediately obvious to me that Terence McKenna had not done that, especially when he described 5-MeO-DMT as, quote, a feeling, and then quickly dismissed it and said, but I just want to tell you all about machine elves and DMT. So we're just going to back down out of the non-dual state, and we're going to get into all this duality, and then ultimately ends up producing a lot of speculations about 2012 and machine elves and UFOs made out of language. And this is another area that personally I find somewhat frustrating, that when Terence McKenna is treated as kind of this psychedelic prophet whose every word is just so meaningful and we all need to learn from it, that when it comes down to things like 2012, I think it's important to acknowledge, and this is another thing that we see in religious traditions, where we have a prophet who makes a prophecy and then the prophecy doesn't come to pass. And then some people get disaffected. But then on the other hand, a lot of religious traditions then kind of gather the ranks and say, well, maybe it's still coming sometime in the future, and that religious tradition then continues and they become even more insistent about their beliefs. And so here with 2012 and Terence McKenna, he was completely and utterly wrong. There's not one thing that he said that is accurate, yet still he's treated as though he's an authority. And I find that deeply troubling, that we are within, and I say we more broadly, within the entheogenic and psychedelic communities, that this person is not openly critiqued, that, hey, he made very specific predictions about what he thought 2012 was about, and he's completely wrong. nothing that he said is actually accurate in any way, shape, or form. So then why the adulation? Why is there so much attention given to the words that this man says when they're wrong? And I think that that's something that people ought to acknowledge within the psychedelic community, that yes, he's a great inspiration. He's a great speaker. He seems like a fun guy, but he also was deeply wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's important. Well, like really just broad reaching, that we question the authority of the information that we receive and acknowledge that the greatest authority is oneself, and that self is beyond the egoic attachments to what you want to believe or what you've already believed. And with Terence McKenna, I feel that when we move into the realm of his more speculative discussions, that for me, it becomes a really fun experience to listen to him talk and get sort of juiced up on really interesting ideas that he presents, while also keeping in mind that a lot of it was very poetic and creative speculation, and kind of keeping it in that place, right? I also would like to acknowledge that some of his, like a lot of his earlier work before he got really deep into speculating about the nature of time and what's going to happen in 2012 and you know what the truth is about the psychedelic experience, he had a lot of like really important discussions on the nature of culture and the nature of society and the history of the drug war and prohibition. And so I want to be sure that we acknowledge things the way they are, but not kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater when we get into recognizing, okay, he said a lot of things that we should probably let go of, and because of that, we shouldn't hold him as a prophet. Also acknowledging the work that he did do in his time that still holds validity and quality inspiration.
Definitely. And one of the ironies of here in 2015, with 15 years after the death of Terence McKenna, is that in many ways, he has been created within the culture to be something exactly what he was arguing against. Where he said, you know, he made statements like culture is not your friend. And he said, you know, question authority and, you know, think for yourself. And so he had a lot of very important things to say there. But then we have a whole generation of people coming up who want to accept him as the ultimate authority on everything. And there's this whole culture that's grown up around Terence McKenna, where, I mean, he himself said, culture is not your friend.
Yeah.
So there's a deep, deep irony going on here. And I think probably if Terence were alive today, if he had lived through 2012, he probably would have just said, well, you know, they were interesting ideas.
Yeah. Even his brother now says, like, looks back and says, when they talk about The Invisible Landscape, which is the book that they co-wrote after they got back from La Terra and their quote unquote mushroom experiments, he said that, like, he doesn't look at that book now and say, oh, yep, that's what it is. He said, oh, yep, those were some really eccentric ideas we were having.
Yeah.
But he doesn't hold to them anymore, because unfortunately, Terence McKenna wasn't offered the opportunity to live a life long enough to look back on his early work and see where his limitations were drawn in hindsight.
Yeah. And, you know, this is one of, I guess I would describe it as maybe one of the dangers of the psychedelic experience, is that it can produce a great deal of enthusiasm within the individual, especially when you experience something that's really strange and really bizarre and also really overwhelming and profound. That one of the functions of the ego is to try and make sense of everything. Mm-hmm. That's just one of the things that it does. It's one of its habits. And so when presented with material like this, like, oh shit, machine elves, it's going to cause people to think about it and speculate about it. And sometimes, you know, something that I see in a lot of intellectuals is what I would call an overindulgence in speculation, where people, in a sense, they actually become addicted to the questions of, well, what if, and perhaps this is true, where rather than trying to winnow away the false ideas and the false beliefs or the ideas that are leading you astray, people dive deeply into them and then create a whole edifice around these ideas and these kernels of experience. And for the intellectual, that can be very, very gratifying. That there's an intoxication to it. It's almost like it's its own form of drug of really getting deeply into these things. And I would say that, having written several works of fiction, that the getting engrossed in an artificial world with artificial characters and artificial ideas, it's really engrossing. I mean, when I was writing my novels, I was going through periods of insomnia because I'm just up at night, just thinking of expanding the world and the characters and the logic of it. And so it's very easy to get caught up in that. But what's much harder for people is to simply be present with what is. That's the deeper challenge. And that's where the non-dual experience comes in, because that's all about simply being present with the nature of reality as it is, without projecting anything onto it, without trying to make sense of it, without trying to put it into categories and boxes, but simply to be present. And that's very, very difficult for people to do for a whole variety of reasons. But at the intellectual level, intellectuals have a hard time doing that because they're so used to wanting to think about things and to understand things. And one of the lessons of the 5-MeO experience is, you want to understand this? Good luck. Okay? Yeah. Good luck, because all of our concepts are themselves limited ideas, limited definitions, and the non-dual experience is an infinite experience, and therefore it cannot be described accurately through language and through words. Now, we can kind of point towards it, and we can give some clues, and we can give some hints, and I obviously spend a lot of time doing that because I write books about it, and I give interviews about it, and I do my podcast about it. So I do think that there are things that can be said, but it cannot be adequately communicated through words. That when someone has the experience, then they can look back and say, oh, okay, I get what you were talking about. But until someone has that experience, no amount of words are going to do it. And from the intellectual perspective of trying to understand things, we're always thinking in words. We're thinking in symbols. We're thinking within concepts. And these are already a limitation coming down out of that experience of complete totality and the infinite nature of being.
That brings up some interesting points for me. The first off is I'm pretty sure Anna Freud had her 7 mechanisms of defense the ego plays to protect itself from trauma. One of them is intellectualism. You over-intellectualize something as a way to protect from the felt experience.
Yes.
And also this idea that there are certain experiences that are beyond the capacity to conceptualize them, and that there is really only one way to integrate those experiences, and that is in presence and a sense of embodying the experience rather than trying to understand it or trying to explain it. Just to be it. You either are it or you're not it, right? And then between those places, there's a lot of fun that can be had with words. And this is where the poetry of the entheogenic experience I'm talking about, it comes in, which is that you can say things in a way that point the listener toward it in their experience, but then there still needs to be that understanding that it's not the words and it's not what you're experiencing in the moment, but it's almost as if in those moments when listening to someone who can say things that kind of, I guess, like hack the perception, like computer hack the perception, to just have a little flash of it. It's like you're getting a little echo from this person's presence unlocked in a play of words, but it's not the words themselves. And it's not the person that has it. You think about the guru, and I don't mean the charlatan, but say like the legitimate guru is, an entire social system that's established around trying to learn from a person who has been there, done it. And oftentimes, like the really authentic guru doesn't say or do anything ever, right? It's people showing up and trying to understand what it is that they're seeing this person embodying, which is actually seeing a potential of themselves. And it's easy to get wrapped up in the dynamic of words and concepts and how do I, get there and understand this, when it's not somewhere you arrive, it's something that you are.
Right. And that's really a deep key to all of this, is that what became clear to me through my non-dual experiences with 5-MeO is that, people say that, oh, I want to achieve unity or experience unity, or I want to unite with God or become one. And the reality is, guess what? You already are.
Yeah.
Okay. That's just the nature of how things are. You cannot become one. You were never separate to begin with. That's an illusion that you've created for yourself. And it's not about coming to the right understanding, about just getting the right ideas lined up in your head, or somehow adopting the right behaviors or the right identity, or, reading the right books or listening to the right music or going to the right kinds of festivals or ceremonies or anything like that. It's that you already are this. And really what the best gurus can do is help you to let go of the crap that you're holding on to that's preventing you from experiencing that, because it's just your true nature. It's just what is. Mm-hmm. And we're covering it over with a lot of speculation, with a lot of habits, with a lot of ideas, with a lot of intellectual concepts. And really the process, I call it the process of or liberation through unknowing, that we think we know a bunch of stuff. And the more of that you can let go of, then you can more and more embody that experience directly. And we're all embodying it already, but we cut ourselves off from it in certain ways. Because again, the ego is like this false character that's always trying to maintain the fiction of itself. So it's very, very active in trying to create a personal identity and a personal sense of self. And, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just the problem is that it creates a lot of distortions along the way as it does that. And it gets involved in illusions and projections and ultimately ends up making people unhappy or afraid or things like that. Mm-hmm. So there's a value to being able to embody yourself as you are outside of the construct of your ego. And it's a mental experience. It's an emotional experience. It's an energetic experience, and it's a body.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. It's an embodied experience. It's not somewhere else. It's not some other realm. It's not some, astral thing or whatever. It's right here. It's right now. And it's you, whether you want it to be you or not. That's just the way that things are. And so you can accept that, or you can, get involved in whatever spiritual tradition that you want to try and achieve this or that, or, whatever. And people give themselves all kinds of goals through spiritual traditions, but a lot of that is just,
and because for me, a lot of experiencing life as being James Jesso comes from my goal set. But I think what's really important here is what you're saying. It's like once you get to the non-dual experience, once you have that as a potential angle to observe your goal set, then the rest of it becomes play. And it's like, yeah, I'm doing this not because I feel like I need to, but because this is my opportunity. Like, no matter what, I'm going to live in some sort of fiction, because also, as Martin, you and I are not having this conversation if on some level we don't embody the fiction. So now I become the author, I become the authority, and my life becomes almost like a type of art form that allows me to draw, paint, dance, whatever I choose within the contextual resources that are available to me in the consciously or not co-creative process that I'm in with the other perceived individuated beings in my space.
Right. Our characters are what allow us to actually enact our will. in the sense that we get to do what we want. And see, in the complete non-dual state with no differentiation, there's no one there really to want anything, and there's nothing there to want, and there's no one there to do, and there's nothing to do and no one to do it with. And so from the absolute non-dual perspective, it's great, it's peaceful, it's infinite, it's blissful, but then there's also really nothing to do there.
It's nothing. And it's no thing in particular. It's nothing.
Exactly. So the fact that we are embodied in these individual vehicles that come with their own little character that has its own perspective on the world, that's a gift we've given to ourselves so that we can do something and we can enact our will. It's like, what do I want to do? I want to play in the snow. I want to eat chocolate. I want to go listen to some music. I want to create some art. That in the absolute non-dual state, none of those things are possible. And so it's this wonderful gift of a variety of experiences from which we can choose from. And really, for me, the only goal is just to maintain clarity and presence within that. And then other than that, it doesn't really matter what you do or what you choose. It's all up to you. And for me, what's important, again, going back to embodiment, is that our bodies as these energetic vehicles have natural desires and natural attractions, and being clear means acting on the energy that we're feeling as we're feeling it without censoring it, without editing it, and being authentic and true. And if we can do that, then we're living in a way that is clear and is free from illusion and projection, and ultimately results in people being much happier and satisfied within themselves. And really, there's no big goal beyond that. I mean, if you can be happy and satisfied and clear and not be projecting your bullshit onto other people, that's great.
And
what more could you want?
I think there's a responsibility. I know that there's a responsibility in what you're saying, because I want to make it clear to the people listening that there's a very good chance that you might hear this and you get this sense of, just really acting authentically, and to just say and be myself authentically at any given moment, and without a real understanding of that direct experience of ultimately everything that I do is an expression of interdependent relationship with all the other I's, that the ego can very quickly hijack that concept and turn it into a means to avoid taking responsibility for your own bullshit. And so, I was just being authentic with myself is an excuse for acting really disrespectfully or doing some sort of form of emotional abuse in the way that you speak to another person. And so as much as there's this higher philosophical level there of like basically be you or be I at any given point authentically, there's also this very human social dynamic interdependent relationship level that says, but keep in mind what it is that I am creating when I'm acting in this authentic way, and is speaking this particular set of words at this time to this person in this way. Is that authentically what I want to create, or is that just like a desire in the moment to just like push my bullshit out and use the excuse of authenticity to justify it?
Right. Which is honestly something that I see happen a lot in kind of alternative communities, new age communities, where people defend their behaviors by saying, well, I'm just being true to myself. But the problem is, if you don't actually know who or what you are, if you haven't experienced that, then you do not know what it means to act authentically, even if you really think you do, if you do not know yourself. So what's coupled with this is the necessity for self-exploration and observation. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think that psychedelics and entheogens come into the picture, that they offer a highly amplified opportunity for us to experience ourselves. And a lot of what people experience, and in fact, what I would describe as most of what people experience through psychedelics and entheogens, often is the projections and the attachments that they have developed through the artificial construct of their ego. So they're not necessarily experiencing, quote, reality. They're experiencing the reality that they're creating through their own perhaps unconscious choices that they've made. So that there's definitely a process that people can go through to clear all that stuff out, to arrive at the non-dual state where it's like, oh, it's actually just nothing. It's everything, and it's just infinite, and it's the self, and that's what it is. And I'm an embodiment of that. That's not something that people just easily jump to. A lot of people have to go through a process of stripping away, taking responsibility for their projections, for their illusions, for their attachments. And then you can really get to know yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you start to realize all the ways you've been projecting onto yourself and onto other people, and how your own behaviors have been an enactment of your own attachments and illusions. And it wasn't authentic at all. That actually it was authentic, but it was coming from a place of deep, deep, deep confusion. And therefore it's not as authentic as it actually could be. It's not the real deal. So when people say, well, I'm just acting authentically. Well, yes, you are, but it's authentic for your position of deep confusion. And if you want to have the most harmonious authenticity, you've got to get beyond all of that stuff. But that takes personal choice and personal responsibility, that people have to be willing to go through that deconstruction process. And it can be
very uncomfortable.
It can be very uncomfortable. It can be physically painful. It can be nauseating. It can be very, very confusing, especially, again, we've been talking about the intellectual types, that where the mind is struggling to make sense of it, that people go through these periods where they feel like they're going insane, and the mind reacts and says, no, I don't want to go insane. But it's going, when you let go of that and say, okay, well, I guess I'm going crazy. I guess I'm dying. Okay. And if you can move into that in a relaxed manner, then that's where the profound transformations take place. So it's, even though this is our natural state, we've spent our entire lifetime building up a barrier to that natural state with all these artificial constructs of our identities and our sense of self. And it takes time to deconstruct that. And sometimes you can give people a really strong dose of 5-MeO DMT, for example, and they can just jump right over all their crap and go right into the non-dual state. But then all that stuff starts to process again as they start to come out of that, and the ego starts to reintegrate, and then they start to encounter that. And for other people, they have to go through the letting go process and the deconstructing process before they can go into the non-dual state. So it can happen both ways, but it's always part of the process, that it's not just, oh, I went into the non-dual state and now I'm totally back in my illusions and everything's cool. It doesn't work that way. It forces, in a sense, by making the choice to do this, it forces the reality of having to deal with your crap in one way or another. And if for people who refuse to deal with their crap, their experience of being becomes very, very unpleasant and very unsettling and very difficult to manage. So there's some cautions in there that if you're not willing to deal with your stuff, don't play with fire. Okay.
Oh yeah, because
just don't.
Like people can come back. This is one of the biggest things that I put in Decomposing the Shadow, my book on mushrooms, is that if you go to this place, the mushrooms expose you to yourself, to your, like, the truth of your emotional, like what you're holding in the core emotions of who you are. If you see those things and they're uncomfortable and you resist them, the resistance, which is almost always futile, creates a type of anxiety, and that anxiety is confusing in an unhealthy way and can leave people with these small expressions of like post-traumatic stress disorder that puts the blockages around one's emotional vulnerability and emotional truth, puts blockages up there in a way that prevents them or makes it more difficult to ever access that point again. And so, yeah, if this is why these conversations, speaking with you and doing what I do with this podcast and with my books and such, I feel is very important, is that people understand that as much as in a way it's a game, in another way it's not a game, and you need to be very careful and very mindful of the choices that you make with entheogens, because the results are very mutable in accordance to how you choose to enter it and how you choose to engage it.
Yeah, one of the things that I see quite often is I get emails from people saying, oh, I had this experience and now I'm going through all these troubles and difficulties, and there's all different kinds of ways that manifests. And sometimes it's a result
from me once, Martin. You got that call from me once.
Yeah, I get that from a lot of people, because maybe someone comes across Being Human, or they listen to my podcast, and then people reach out because I do try and communicate to the best of my ability in a way that is clear, and that resonates with some people. Some people it really aggravates because they think, "How do you can't possibly be that clear, and you're just full of yourself." But for other people, they're able to say, "Whoa, okay, maybe this person can help me." So a lot of people do reach out that way to me. And so I, just from that level of experience, I would say that there's a lot of people out there who have encountered psychedelic experiences and entheogenic experiences, and they've come away deeply troubled by it. And unfortunately, just the way that society is right now, I think that things are changing, but it's still, all of it is so much underground that, a lot of people, they're contacting me and they're saying, I have no one else I can talk to about this, that I'm so alone and I'm scared. And, so sometimes I end up on Skype or on the phone with people, and I talk to them for a couple hours to, help them through the stuff that they're working on. And often the advice that I'm giving them is trust and relax. Just trust and relax. But what's going on, as you were just describing, is that there's a reaction that's going on, and there's a rebolstering of the constructs of the ego, of fighting against the process. And so what I tell people is like, look, you've opened up Pandora's box. You're not going to be able to put everything back in the box again, because you've started this process, and you can't just say, I don't want it anymore. That's not a viable option. Mm-hmm. So the only thing to do is sit back, relax, and accept the process as it's unfolding, and understand that the more you fight against it, or the more you struggle with it, the more difficult it's going to become. And it takes such a deep level of trust to be able to do that. And it's like, it's like sex in a sense. It's about opening yourself up to merging with the deeper level of yourself, and that all kinds of fears and projections come up along the way. But if you can just trust and relax, it becomes the most intimate experience possible, as these two halves of yourself, the dual side of yourself and the non-dual side of yourself, are able to melt into each other. And then you just experience yourself as you are. And it's...
Oh, I fully agree. I personally believe that, well, I'll just use the word conscious sexual exchanges with an intimate partner who the bridge of vulnerability has been expanded and is very sound because of exchanges of trustworthiness, are on par with the type of opening and perspective and, we'll just say, healing or experience that an entheogen can offer you.
Yeah, because when you're in a really profound act of making love with another person, the identities of those two people fall away and they become one unit, and there's no need for spoken words, and it's just everything is perfect, and there's this unity that's taking place there. And again, that's not a unity that's being created. It's a unity that's actually just being revealed. It's a unity that's already there, but it's the characters of the ego that's covering over that and kind of trying to keep that hidden. But as that falls away, there becomes this perfect union, and the sense of individual identity falls away. The sense of, is this my body or her body or his body, or whose body is this? That also falls away, and it just becomes
love.
one act of love and trust and surrender in the moment. And it's being perfectly present with that. And that's what the non-dual experience is. But it's making love with yourself as all of reality, as God, as the universal being in consciousness that manifests as all the particular things that we experience.
I fully agree. I also, in that agreement, I would use a different set of language describing the sexual act. I would say that it is something that we're creating, as in we, as our independent, say, fictional story selves, come together to, as an act of God realizing itself, create that experience. It's not contrived. It's a very authentic, it's a very real experience. We didn't make it up in a sense that it's a fiction, but it's an act of creation in a more pardon the word, but in a more religious use of the term, that love making itself is an act of creation, and part of that creation is creating the space to allow the truth of oneness to stream through a point of awareness or 2 points of awareness becoming one.
Right. Well, we're always creating in the sense that in every moment we are making choices. Mm-hmm. And through our choices, we are helping to create the results that we're getting and the way that we are able to interpret that experience. So that is something that never, ever, ever, ever goes away. The aspect of choice is always there, even if, and this is something that people get really confused about, because people, if something bad happens to you and you say, well, I didn't choose that. And I say, well, no, maybe you didn't choose that, but you do get to choose how you react to it, how you either be present with it, or how you choose to try and protect yourself from it. Mm-hmm. So one of the
those choices are not easy.
No.
Like, we don't choose our immediate reaction or response to something often, or at least the vast majority of us don't, but we are to certain degrees empowered with the opportunity to modulate those choices in a way that allows for a more effective resolution or navigation of whatever it is that came up, autonomically.
Right, which is why self-observation becomes very important. That the more you learn about yourself and your own habits of reaction, mm-hmm. the more clearly you can choose. Because most people are making choices from a very unconscious place where, maybe somewhere way back in someone's past when they were a little kid, that they developed the belief that they weren't worthy of receiving unconditional love. Okay. So then they've made this choice, but they made it so long ago, they're not even aware of it. And so now as an adult, they find themselves continually trapped in unsatisfactory relationships that are ending in a way that's ruinous and disastrous for everyone. And they're saying, why can't I just find love? I said, well, maybe you've actually made the choice that you're not worthy of that, so that you are unconsciously sabotaging your relationships all along the way. And it takes uncovering the layers of protection and pain to find where that choice was made within the individual. And then once the person finds that choice, then they can take responsibility for it and say, well, actually, I choose to be worthy of unconditional love. And then boom, the heart explodes. And it's, oh my God, it's all love. It's all love. It's all okay. But a lot of people are keeping that from themselves for whatever reason. Maybe it was the religious upbringing. Maybe it was a traumatic experience that occurred when they were young. You never know. But the more we learn about ourselves, the more we observe ourselves, not in an obsessive way. That sometimes people get caught up in psychotherapy and they're really obsessive with, I want to know everything about myself.
You could dig forever and always find more trauma.
Right. So it's about observing. For me, the way that I would describe it, it's about observing how energy works within your own being, within your sense of your heart, your breath, your mind, your body, observing how your body contracts when something happens that you don't like, or observe how your breath changes, or how your tone of voice changes, or how your facial expressions change as you encounter things that make you uncomfortable. And then you start to realize, oh, I'm actually manipulating energy, that every time I get uncomfortable, my left eyebrow goes up. Yeah. Well, why am I doing that? And then feeling into, well, maybe I can choose not to raise my left eyebrow up, that I'm going to become conscious of that. And now I'm uncomfortable, but I'm actually not raising my eyebrow, or whatever it is that the person does. But there's a movement of energy that's taking place. So it takes observation of yourself to see how energy is circulating throughout your being, and whether you're allowing it or if you're somehow manipulating it based on your choices. And that's what allows people to then come to a place of acting from authentic energy rather than manipulated energy. And that's where true individual authenticity is. But it takes careful observation and often clearing out these patterns, because they become very ingrained within people, and it takes time. It takes work.
Right. And that's something that, a mature entheogenic experience or relationship or process can offer a person. It's also, to me, I believe that a really mature, intimate relationship does the same thing when both parties are coming in with the understanding that as the trustworthiness, these are the terms I'd like to use, as the exchange of trustworthiness builds a wider, more secure bridge between both members of the relationship, or all the members of the relationship, it allows for the transport of vulnerability to be at a higher capacity, and thus we are triggered at deeper places. And in watching the body language, you can see, paying attention, like, are my arms crossed because I'm angry because my partner said something, and now I'm pointing as I'm speaking? So am I closed to what they have to say?
Right.
And am I projecting responsibility onto them? And even in the entheogenic experience, when I think about my recent my Yopo experience, I was very sick and resistant for some time, and it took a lot to me actually to release. And while I was lying there sick, I had this really strong desire to just roll over and basically take the fetal position, and I had to keep reminding myself, no, like, lie back and just like open my body.
Right.
And if I need to be sick, then I'll sit up and I'll put my face in the bucket. Right. But I'm going to do my absolute best here not to resist the energy moving here any more than I already am, because I'm here to figure out how to push past this, because I clearly have not been able to figure it out. And the patterns come back and they go away, and they come back and they go away, and they come back and they go away. So I'm not really sure where I was going with that, but I feel like that noticing of body language and how we moving the energy being physical posture, it being emotional disposition, being waves of emotion, being ideas, that this is a very valuable piece that you've offered in the discussion, Martin, to bring into awareness.
I think it's so important. And it's something that's generally left out of psychedelic / entheogenic conversations, that a lot of what goes on within the broader community is at this intellectual level, and metaphysics and speculation, and then impositions of spiritualities and things like this. And for the most part, people aren't talking about really simple things like pay attention to your body language. People talk about, how do I make a ceremony sacred? Who cares how you make a ceremony sacred? That's completely irrelevant. Pay attention to your body language. Pay attention to the way that energy is moving through you, and how you're either resisting that or you're allowing it. That this, for me, this is the most fundamental issue about how to maximize one's experience with entheogens. It's not about making it sacred. It's not about making a beautiful ceremony. You can do all those things if you want.
If it helps you relax into the experience more, then
yes,
it's great.
But oftentimes the flip side of that is that people get attached to these aspects of the entheogenic experience. Like people say, oh, well, I really want to experience a sacred ayahuasca ceremony with a shaman in the Amazon. Well, that's great, but
it's its own unique, very interesting experience.
Yeah, but you can get whatever it is that you're looking for. You can get it out of your bedroom by yourself. Okay. Now, there's an advantage to having someone who knows what they're doing help guide you through. But the tendency for people to become attached to these things are very, very strong. And again, it's a natural aspect of the ego, that the ego wants to feel safe. It wants to feel that it's doing things right. It wants to feel that it is doing things in a way that's valuable in some capacity, and that it fits with ideas of right versus wrong. And so for some people, then they latch on to this, and the structure itself becomes the thing rather than the deepening of the experience. And again, if we can just bring it back to body language, bring it back to your breath, bring it back to your own sensations of your own beating heart, and whether you're able to relax into that or not, that's really where the deepest work occurs. And for me, I don't care if that's taking place with a shaman or in your garage or out in the middle of nature. It doesn't matter. The location is really irrelevant. All location for me only matters in the sense, the setting only matters in the sense of, are you able to trust, relax, and let go? Right. And if the answer to any of those is no, then you're in the wrong place. And if the answer is yes, then you're in a place that's going to serve you well.
Right. And that being the case, just I feel called to make a personal note to anyone listening who might be inspired by that to keep that in mind, because if doing ayahuasca alone in your bedroom or any entheogen can be very turbulent, ayahuasca itself can make you very, very sick. And having somebody there, whether they're a shaman or not, to make sure that you're not too sick and that you don't get so afraid that you cause these traumas and experiences are helpful. It's like, I just want to throw in that little disclaimer of like, probably don't do ayahuasca alone in your bedroom unless you've done it before and you know what you're doing. Yeah.
Right. It's important to point out that especially if someone is new to working with any particular medicine, that it's always good to at least have a sitter with you just from a safety standpoint. Because what happens is when we introduce an entheogen into our bodies is we're going to be amplifying our energetic experience across all levels of our being. And for people who are experienced with it and know how to trust and relax, it can be a very peaceful experience. And then if there's purging that needs to happen, you get up, you purge, and then you lie back down or whatever it is. Yeah. But for people who have a lot of stuff to work out, for people who have a lot of distortions within their own personal energy, it can be extraordinarily turbulent. And the tendency of the ego is to react. And so for some people, that means getting up and trying to run away. And that might mean running through a window, or it could mean you're thrashing your house and you're not aware of the limits of your body. So you end up physically hurting yourself, or you're purging all over yourself. And so it gets really messy. And then there's always the fear of asphyxiation. And so the thing is that you have to know how your body's going to react and how your ego is going to react to these things. And for most of the time, you don't know until you experience it. And then you realize, oh, okay, I'm a thrasher, or I have a tendency to curl up in a fetal position. And so then you know, and so you get an idea of, am I just able to open and relax and dissolve and it's completely peaceful and blissful, or is it very turbulent? And so that gives you an idea of what level of work you're going to need to engage in. But it's very important that, going back to that idea of being able to trust, relax, and let go. Sometimes, having a sitter, again, even if it's not a shaman or someone who's deeply experiencing these things, though it helps to have someone who's deeply experienced with these things, because then they're the ones who can really reassure you when you're really freaking out.
Because you can trust that if they say everything's okay, go deeper, that they know what's what.
Yeah.
It's less likely to be basically contrived assumptions about what the imagery represented and who and what you were communicating with amongst people who are more deeply experienced.
Right. But it's very important to note that these things do happen, that people do have very visceral reactions. And just something that keeps popping into mind as we're talking about this is recently I watched, one of these ridiculous salvia videos on YouTube. If people are completely inexperienced, like, oh, I want to try salvia. And so there's these, probably teenagers in this apartment, and they're sitting on a couch and they pack a bong full of salvia, and the guy smokes it and then he passes it over to the girl, and the guy kind of falls back on the couch as the girl's taking her hit. And then it, for anyone who has taken salvia, as it will suddenly instantly come on, where 1 second you don't feel anything and the next thing is like, oh my God. And this guy gets up off the couch and he climbs to the top of the couch, and there's this window that's high up on the wall. He breaks the window and rolls out the window of the apartment. And meanwhile, the girl is freaking out and she's backing up and she's trying to climb. She's like a cat, like a cat that's scared that she's trying to back herself into a corner, and she's all hunched over. And so that's a very visceral reaction that people are having. And it's not the salvia that's doing this. It's their reaction to the salvia that's doing this. And so
it's also the consequence of having a broken drug education prohibition. Basically this broken system that leads people to making these very unsafe, irresponsible choices with substances like salvia.
Right. In the ideal world, we'd have somewhere that they could go to where someone experienced could introduce them to salvia. And then also, before they do that, could tell them, these are the kinds of reactions that you might have. And so that person themselves need to be experienced in observing many different people having gone through salvia experiences, because everyone's going to react differently, though there certainly are a lot of commonalities in the ways that people react. But it should be somewhere that's safe and somewhere that there are experts there that can help them, rather than, hey, I just ordered this off the internet and I hear this will get you really fucked up, so want to come over and try it?
Yeah, or like I just bought this at the corner store. It's 100x. I hear it's really sweet.
Yeah, so let's try it. It's like better than pot.
Yeah, it's like pot, but more epic.
Yeah,
oh, no.
and that's a reflection of what is considered allowed within culture, that, you know, most people who come to psychedelics, they end up doing it on their own or in situations that are considered underground, or perhaps they're traveling out of the country, and, you know, it's more common for people to go take ayahuasca in the Amazon, but
their pilgrimage.
Yeah, but with salvia, I mean, where do you go for salvia? I mean, you can go down with the Mazatex, but, you know, how many people are doing that? Not
how many
too
people
many
have even read and understand like the traditions around the Mazatec? Like Kathleen Harrison describes her experience with salvia, that she would do it by herself and there would be other people there to take care of her, and two people whose role was specifically to make sure that you're okay, that you don't bolt and run into the woods or run into the jungle.
Which is what a lot of people do on salvia. You give them salvia and all of a sudden, boop, they're up and they're running out the door because they're trying to get away. And of course you can't. So that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and all the psychedelics are like that, where you can try and get away, but once you've ingested it, you know, you're in for the ride.
Yeah, you might as well let go and enjoy.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like a roller coaster. You're going chink, 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 chink. You're going up to the top of the roller coaster. Well, you get to the top and you suddenly decide, oh, crap, I didn't want to do this. Too late.
Yeah.
Okay, you already made that decision. So now is time to pay attention to your body language, pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to your energy, and relax and trust. And no matter how confusing or how scary it gets, stay relaxed. Just be present with yourself, and that's what's going to maximize the experience for you. And that's not going to necessarily make it easy, because you might have some really epic purging that you need to go through. You might have to scream and take off all your clothes, and you might have to defecate on yourself. But if that's what you, if that's what you need to do, the sooner you allow yourself to go through it, the sooner it will be that you won't need to do that again.
Ever.
Yeah.
So with that being said, Martin, I want to express a lot of a very deep gratitude for everything that you've offered here in the conversation. We're kind of coming up a little over time here, and I would also like to invite you into offering whatever information you'd like to leave the listeners with. Where can we get a hold of you? For example, the name of your podcast, maybe the book that you'd like to promote, or your website, etc.
Okay, let's do some promo plugs. First of all, my website is martinball.net, martinball.net. That's my main webpage, and I've got links to a lot of different stuff on there, such as my podcast, which is the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. And you can find that at entheogenic.podomatic.com, or just go to my webpage and there's links available there. There's also links to music. I'm a very active musician, make a lot of different music. Currently find myself playing in two bands right now here in Ashland, kind of by happenstance. But I record a lot of music, and so you can find music on my webpage. And then also there's links to like SoundCloud and CD Baby and what's that other one? Bandcamp.com. And so lots of stuff there. Then there's also art that I make a lot of visionary fractal art. And you can find that again on my main webpage, but also link to my art webpage, which is fractalimagination.com. My most recent book is Being Infinite, which is really, it's the most personal book I've written. It's a memoir just describing my early life experiences and how I got interested in psychedelics and entheogens, and then the really profound process that I went through after first encountering 5-MeO DMT and everything that transpired from that. Which even there, some people say, oh, well, you ended it right when things were getting really interesting. And so I said, well, I was just trying to tell a particular story with that, and maybe I'll continue at some point.
Life stories are long stories, man, hopefully.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing that I would leave the audience with in terms of a plug is coming up here in Ashland in very early June 4th and 5th, which is a Thursday and Friday. We're going to be having our second annual Exploring Psychedelics conference at Southern Oregon University. And another professor and I at the university put this conference together last year. And it was really small. We have a very strong entheogenic community here in Ashland, where we have the Temple of Awakening Divinity, which uses 5-MeO DMT. We have now 2 different branches of the Santo Daime Church are active here in Ashland. There's a strong Native American church community here in use of peyote. There also are a number of visiting ayahuasca shamans that come into the local area. So it's a small community here, but it's kind of an epicenter of entheogenic activity. So we put together this conference last year, and we had a few different speakers, and we showed Neurons to Nirvana, and it was just one day, and everyone was local. And we had a great turnout. So I really wanted to do it again this year. So I've been busy organizing this. So it's going to be June 4th and 5th at Southern Oregon University here in Ashland. Something that's unique about this conference is that it's free. Most of these conferences you have to pay several $100s to go to. We're putting on ours for free, which also means we're not able to pay speakers for travel or anything like that. But it's free and open to the public. And this year on Thursday, we're going from 9:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And on Friday, we're starting at 9 in the morning and we're going till 6 at night. Then we have an after party with my band. Fractal Love Jam is going to be playing downtown, which also is free. We have 18 different speakers that are lined up. We have a showing of Rack Razum's Aya Awakenings film, and we're also going to have a Skype-in conversation with Rack on that. We're going to have a little Skype-in with you, James, also.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, man.
And we've got a one-woman performance called Ayahuasca Visions by Josie Hyde, and it's a multimedia performance piece, and that's going to wrap up the conference. But we've got members of the Santo Daime Church, Native American Church, Ayahuasqueros. We've got speakers about mushrooms, about cannabis, about peyote, about ayahuasca. We've got Dr. Octavio Rettig from Mexico, who's been busy traveling around the world, giving people the 5-MeO experience through the United Nations of all things. He's going to be at the conference. So there's going to be a lot of great speakers. We've got a lot of local visionary artists who are lined up to show art at the event as well. We're going to have information booths and tables. It's really going to be spectacular, and it's free. It's open to the public. Anyone who's interested can check out our website. It's exploring-psychedelics.org. And so www.exploring-psychedelics.org. And we've got a Facebook page for it as well. So you can go by and like that. And I think that's probably all the plugs I should do at the moment.
No, that's absolutely great, Martin. I, again, thank you very much for everything that you've offered in this interview. And I wish you an absolutely wonderful rest of the day.
All right. You too. Thanks for having me on, James. And congratulations on having your own podcast now.
Thanks, man. And so concludes episode 5 of ATTMind Radio. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed today's show and you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to show your support in some way, the absolute best way to do that is to head over to truelightofdarkness.com and check out my current Indiegogo campaign. This campaign is raising money for my new book, True Light of Darkness, which is a storytelling expose of 3 of my deepest, darkest psilocybin experiences and basically what they offered my life. It's a follow-up to Decomposing the Shadow, and it's my next step in this world as an author, and I also feel that it'll be a valuable contribution to the entheogenic culture at large. So head on over and check it out. Obviously, donations are the absolute best way to help support the project, though shares and comments on the Indiegogo campaign, these are really super supportive as well, because it gets the word out there. So anything you're called to do, again, is deeply appreciated. So thank you again for listening, and until the next episode, take care.